I'm not gonna lie, one of my biggest regrets right now is that I don't have a sombrero or a cowboy hat to wear during this video. Hey, what's up you guys? I'm Caitlin from Leave Me Alone Plants, your favorite desert dweller. And today I am here to give you all the tips that I have learned living in the desert and caring for houseplants. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button. But I spent most of my life living in upstate New York, where it is cool and humid and a really different scenario for growing plants. Then 2 years ago, I packed up all my stuff, including my plants, and moved across the country to beautiful, sunny, and hot, very, very, very hot.
That's hot.
Phoenix, Arizona. Now, I remember when I was moving here, I just had these fantasies of how it was going to be so easy to take care of my plants because it never got cold and there was always sunlight. And while some of those things are true, on average, I find it to be 10 times more difficult to care for my houseplants in Arizona than it was in Buffalo. So with that said, if you live in Arizona or maybe Las Vegas or some other desert somewhere in this world and you're struggling taking care of your houseplants, first of all, know that you're not alone, and second of all, keep on watching and I'm going to get into all the tips that I have used over the years to keep my plants happy and healthy. Okay, so quick disclaimer, I obviously am just starting the filming of this video, but based on what I have in my notes on my phone over here, I feel like this one's gonna be a long one. It's gonna be a doozy, okay? So if you came here with a specific question that you are really hoping to get answered, I will put timestamps down below as well as make chapters in the slider bar. So if you're wondering specifically about things like lighting or watering, you can skip to that time because, as I said, this is probably gonna be a little on the long side. However, if you're just here for kicks, then grab yourself a cup of coffee and enjoy the show. Okay, one more thing before we get started, and that is basically going to be my universal word of advice for all of these topics, which is that if you live in one of these desert climates that is very different, if you go to the store and pick up a plant and are reading the plant label, or maybe you're watching a YouTube video, maybe it's one of mine, about how to care for a plant, or maybe you're reading a blog post on Google, just be mindful of the fact that the person who is making that content very well may not have made it coming from the perspective of somebody living in Arizona or the desert in general. With that said, those care requirements are going to be very, very different from what you are going to need to give your plant. So again, just keep that in the back of your mind. That is really going to be true across every one of these topics that we discussed today. So let's start out with one of the most important topics when we are in the desert, and that is water. Now, luckily through modern engineering, we are able to have all sorts of water and great things here in the desert. But with that said, the conditions in general are going to mean that you probably have to water your plants a lot more than you would in other parts of the world. Additionally, one of the things that I noticed over my first year living here is that throughout the seasons, if you have plants outdoors, your watering cycles on them are going to change drastically. The plants that I have outside this time of year when it's cooler, and by cooler I mean like in the high 80s, I can water them on a more normal cycle. Whereas during the summer, even things like succulents and, my bougainvillea and things that shouldn't need to be watered that often, I have to water almost every single day or they will die.
Water would be nice.
So again, if you're new to the desert and you're locked in, it's like fall or spring or even winter, and you're thinking that this is easy, do just note that when the summertime comes, if you do have those plants outdoors, you are going to need to bump up the amount of time that you are watering those plants throughout the week. Now, if you're somebody like me who is an underwater or you are just forgetful, here are some things that I do to be able to water my plants less often in the desert. The first one is something I started doing recently, and it has made a huge difference, and that is taking moss and putting it on the top layer of soil in my plants. This really seems to help to lock the humidity inside the pot and not let it just all escape out into the air. And because of this, I am noticeably able to water my plants way less often. Now, I typically use sheet moss for this, but I'm sure that you can use, anything from reindeer moss to, moss that is growing in the ground, but it is a great way to lock that moisture into the soil. Another thing that I use a little bit sparingly, but is a great tool, are these hydro spikes. Now, some people use these for going on vacation, but I like to use these for my plants like my zebra plant or peace lilies, things that are going to have a literal freak out if you do not give them consistent water. Basically how they work is this spike part. You pop the cap off, you fill it up with water. Well, I think the first time you buy them, you soak them first, then you fill it up with water. pop the cap back on. You are going to stick this part into the soil of your plant as close to the base as you can get it, and then you have this other end that you are going to stick in some kind of vessel. Perhaps it is a cup, perhaps it is a watering can. It really doesn't matter. Stick that into that vessel of water, and through capillary action, the plant will suck water into the soil. Now, if you only want your plant to get a little bit of water and are scared that you might overwater it, leave the vessel of water at a lower level than your plant. I feel like I need to demonstrate. So if you don't want it to get much water, you put the vessel here, put the plant up here, and vice versa. If you want it to get a lot of water, then you can kind of even them out, or even have the vessel of water higher than the plant, and through gravity or, I don't know, osmosis, the water will travel faster to the plant. Hopefully that made sense, but if it didn't and you guys are interested in like a full-on hydrospike video, let me know and I can do one below. But overall, fantastic tool. You have finicky plants that need a lot of water, or if you're just going on vacation, even if you don't live in the desert, these can be a great option. So yeah, hydrospikes. I'll link them down below. Okay, and that brings us into our next topic, which is light in the desert. Now again, coming from Buffalo and going to New York, it was really a shock at how much brighter the sun is here. And that might sound weird if you've like never been somewhere like Arizona or down in the Southwest. You might think that sun is just sun, but I promise you it is not. I would say a cloudy day here is equivalent to a bright sunny day of what we used to get in Buffalo in terms of the intensity of the light. I have on more occasions than I would like to admit left my plants outside for just a couple hours and unfortunately returned to them being burnt to a crisp. The sun is so strong, it's literally as though you put your plants in an oven, and it happens very fast. So like we discussed in the beginning of the video with, you know, tags on nursery plants not always being accurate if you live in the desert, I would say this is the most true when it comes to sun. I could probably count on one hand the number of plants that can actually handle a full day of Arizona full sun, but you'll find so many plants at the nursery that if you read the label, it will say that they like full sun conditions. I would be very careful with doing this, and even when I read full sun or, you know, bright light on a plant, here in Arizona, I basically tend to bump that category down to one below what the tag recommends, and that seems to be a really good sweet spot for my plants. Hopefully that made sense. I feel like this video is already getting off the rails. Also, I feel like I'm losing my voice. Now, something I thought was kind of funny and I actually never really knew about before I moved here is that plants actually can get sunburned. In many cases, they will literally turn red, which is kind of funny. Also kind of sad because typically they die, but kind of funny. So they can get sunburned. But what's really cool is particularly things like cacti or euphorbia, if they do get sunburned, they actually grow like calluses and thicker skin in that area so that in the future they will not get sunburned and they can handle that. Finally, one light tip that I have that might seem really intuitive, but coming from somewhere like Buffalo, New York, where it is cloudy basically all year round, was not intuitive to me. And that is, as the year progresses, the light will change locations in the sky. For example, I live in an apartment, the entire side of my apartment faces the south, so you know, of course, I got those beautiful south-facing windows that everybody is after, but conversely, I also have a south-facing patio. And the problem is that once we hit about late September, the sun shifts into a position in the sky that it shines directly into my patio and burns all my plants. So with that said, just be proactive throughout the year in making sure that if the sun is shifting, that you are kind of moving your plants into a location where they're safe, because I have once again lost many plants having them in a location that was fine during the summer, but as the winter came, the sun had shifted and completely burnt them up. Okay, chugging right along to temperature. So we had an extremely hot summer here. And by extremely hot, I mean most of the days were above 110 degrees. It was no joke. And throughout the summer, I learned a lot about taking care of plants. One thing you guys might not know, but I actually down in my garage is where I run my plant shop. And while I do have some climate control, it's basically just outdoors. So I really got a good handle on how plants can survive during different temperatures. Now, every plant's going to be different, but a really good rule of thumb that I would say is that if you're comfortable in shorts and a t-shirt or kind of lightly dressed clothes, then your plants will likely be comfortable in that temperature. I find that the range of 60 through 90 degrees seems to really be the sweet spot for where most plants are going to be happy. However, during those months where it is getting much hotter, do note that if your plants are outside, you're going to have a pretty difficult time keeping them happy once it gets above about 90 degrees. Not to say that it can't be done, but it just gets a lot more difficult. Additionally, as we are now into fall here, another important thing to really watch out for in the desert is temperature swings. It is not uncommon this time of year for us to have days during the 80s and then have the nighttime lows be in the 40s. So just be cognizant that even though it is very warm during the day, in the desert, those temperatures can swing pretty good, so just keep an eye out for that. My final actionable tip of how to manage the heat in the summer with your plants without drying out the air and running your air conditioner into oblivion are air cooling fans. The great thing about air cooling fans is that they both add cooler air into your home while increasing the humidity. Basically how it works, it's a normal fan and you fill it up with water just like you would fill up a humidifier. Now that water slowly gets released throughout the fan and would blow out basically just like a fan humidifier combo. However, what cools down the air is the fact that you put a cooling pack in the very top of it. The water passes through the cooling pack, it cools down the air and the humidity, and then as the fan blows out the air, it is blowing out cool humidified air. Now these are what I use down in my garage in the summer to keep my inventory from all dying, and believe me, they make a huge difference. So if you don't want to crank up your AC, if you don't want to miss out on humidity in your home, then I highly recommend checking one of these out. I will put the one that I have down in the description below, but there are a ton of models out there, so do your research and find the one that is best for you. Okay, moving on to humidity. I feel like humidity is the one great equalizer that so many people across the country have to deal with, regardless of if you're living in a desert or just an arid climate. However, particularly in the desert, we really struggle here with humidity. My general household humidity tends to be somewhere around the 30-ish% mark. Depending where you are, it might be a little higher or lower, but that's about what I get. Now, to be honest, living here in the desert, there are just certain plants that I do not keep, that I do not purchase because I know that my household humidity does not allow for it. With that said, of course, if there is a will, there is a way. You can always accommodate plants who need something crazy like 80% if you're willing to set up something like a grow tent or place it directly next to a humidifier. However, these tips are more so going to be for generally raising your household humidity, but not necessarily anything crazy. So obviously the easiest solution is to go out and buy a humidifier. But here's the problem. In Arizona, our water has a ton of calcium in it. And because that calcium is in the water, when you run the humidifier, it basically spews a shower of calcium all over my house and my entire house ends up covered in dust. For that reason, I do not like to run a standard humidifier in the house. Now again, that is complete preference, but I just don't like doing it. However, a big thing for me is raising the local humidity around plants that really need it. One of the things that I do that seem to have actually really helped is placing little jars of water next to those plants who require more humidity. Now the ones that I have, I will admit, do have pretty narrow mouths, but the larger of a mouth that you can get on the bottle, the better, the more surface area that the water will have to absorb into the air, and the more humidity that you will get out there. Now additionally, I think a more mainstream way of doing this would be to use a humidity mat or a pebble tray. Basically how those work are you either lay a piece of fabric or you fill up a little vessel with stones and pour water inside, and basically throughout the day that water absorbs out of there and gives your plants humidity in the local area. Now naturally, this is also going to happen as you water your plants. As you water them, the water that you put into the pot is slowly going to evaporate out of the top. This is why very often you'll find that the first couple inches of soil may be dry, but if you pull the plant out and look at the bottom of the soil, it's completely wet. It's because that water is just flowing out of the top of the soil. Now for this reason, if you have plants and you place them close together or bunched together, that is going to allow basically a force field of humidity to exist around them. Now again, going off that same principle, you can also mist your plants with these cute little misters. Personally, I love this one. Some people will say that this doesn't make a difference. However, I disagree with them. Basically, it is the same thing that you were doing with a humidity mat, doing by placing little vessels of water. Basically, by putting that water into the air, you're allowing it to evaporate over time. Now that evaporation process will happen a lot quicker if you're just spraying a little mist into the air versus if you have a full-on vessel of water. I feel like I am impossible to keep spraying this. I'm literally soaking wet already. But basically, yes, it does work. It just isn't going to be as long-lasting as some of the other methods that we talk about. Finally, these are some things that I consider kind of the top tier, starting to get a little into the crazier realm of adding humidity into your house, and that can include things like not turning the fan on when you take a shower, leaving the bathroom door open. I do both of those, and really I find that a ton of humidity flows out of my bathroom, which is great. It's a huge help. Also things like when your dishwasher finishes running, there's usually a ton of steam in there. If you open that up, let it flow out into your house. If you really want to get crazy, and probably if you live alone or just have a really tolerant roommate, You can even do things like fill up your sink with a very shallow level of water or your bathtub. And again, those will basically act as giant vessels, letting water evaporate into the air and therefore adding humidity to your home. So that was a lot of ways to increase your humidity. Hopefully one of those methods sounds like a good one to you and can help you out a little bit. Basically, the more that you do, the better effects that you'll see, and you can really bump up your humidity artificially without having to run a humidifier, which I think is great. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is picking plants. I know for me, when I first moved here, I had a little bit of background on plants, but not super crazy background, so I always really struggled going into the garden center and trying to figure out which plants would survive in my house with low humidity and which plants wouldn't. Now, of course, the first thing that I will always say is no matter where you are, try asking one of the employees. Typically, if you're at a local nursery, they will always have really good advice. I'd say about 50% of the time if you go to a big box store. Some of the people really know their stuff and can really help you. Other people, not so much. Maybe they're just the dumps for the day. I'm not really sure. But either way, if you're not sure, ask. Usually there is somebody there who can point you in the right direction. The next thing that I did that some people can think is kind of a boring way, but I've actually found so many of my favorite plants from doing, is shopping in the outdoor garden section. Now, by doing this, you are basically ensuring that the plants that you're picking probably don't need a crazy amount of humidity. While some nurseries will have misters outside, the most of the time, especially here in Arizona, you can't keep up with super high humidity plants if you're storing them outside, so typically nurseries will not put those types of plants outside. Now, one caveat I will say here is just be careful that if you're buying a plant that requires a ton of sunlight, that you have a place for that in your house that you can give a ton of sunlight to, but overall, it's a great way to be sure that the plants that you are bringing into your home are going to be able to survive with lower humidity. My final tip of advice is if you're in the plant store and you find a plant and you really love it, but you're not sure if it's going to work for you, pull out your phone. Google is a magic thing. It will help you. Now, the problem here is I know sometimes you're looking on plant labels and it will say things like beautiful foliage or houseplant, which is super unhelpful if you're not familiar with the name to be able to figure it out. However, a really cool thing that you can do is download the Google app. If you look in here, you'll see a little marker on the right-hand corner. If you press that, it brings up a camera. You can take a picture of the plant, and basically from there, it does a Google image search to find any similar looking image. 9 times out of 10, it will be able to identify the plant for you. And from there, you can do a quick check to see if it meets your requirements inside your house. Okay, 2 more topics, you guys. We're almost done. This next topic is going to be things like pruning, propagating, or starting things from seeds. Now, I think kind of common knowledge, or at least knowledge if you watch enough plant videos that you'll find out, is many videos will tell you try to avoid propagating plants in the winter time. However, in Arizona here, I am going to flip that and say I try to avoid doing these types of actions in the summertime. The reason being, if your plants are already in a super stressed state because it's like 110 degrees outside, the last thing that you want to do is go hacking pieces off of it and make the plant focus all its energy on healing itself back up. While you can, of course, do it in emergency situations or, at your own discretion, I really do advise that if you are going to do these actions, try and do it in the months where the weather is a little more temperate here. It can really throw your plant into a stressed state even more than it already is, and bad things can happen from there very quickly. So highly, highly recommend if you are looking to take cuttings, maybe hold off until it cools down a little bit. This also goes into starting seeds. Now we have these beautiful USDA zones that tell us what time of year is best to start seeds based on where we live. One caveat with this system that doesn't always make it so great is it's based off of the average low temperatures in that area and does not take into account how hot it gets here. I remember right at the beginning of summer, I decided that I wanted to start an herb garden on my patio. I bought a bunch of starters, I got super excited, I planted them all, it was fantastic. After all, summer is when you grow crops, right? Wrong, not in Arizona, it's not. Just because looking at your zone map, you may find that those seeds fall within that season on there, does not mean that summer is necessarily the best time to start growing those seeds. I do recommend holding off a little bit if you are looking to do crops, as they do tend to do a little bit better in the cooler months when it is not 115 degrees every day. Whew, my SD card just filled up. This really is a long video. Okay, basically to wrap that point up, if you know a lot about gardening, drop the tips down below, but otherwise just be mindful of the time of year that you're doing things, and just because in other parts of the world summer might be traditionally the time that they do it, does not mean that it is the best time of year here in Arizona. Okay, and finally, the very last topic I wanted to discuss today is pots. One thing that you might notice as you see me bring different plants on this channel is that you typically never see me using terracotta pots. And that is not by accident. While I do use terracotta sometimes if I have a plant that's really sensitive to getting root rot, Typically, I opt for something that is either a plastic or a glazed ceramic with drainage holes, of course, so that I can kind of lock that moisture into the sides of my pot without having to go in and water it all the time. Again, based on everything else we've learned in this video between watering and temperatures and lighting, trust me when I say plants dry out very fast in the desert. So by picking a pot that will take that into consideration, you will really save yourself a lot of work down the road. Now, again, that is my preference. I'm sure there will be people in the comment section who say, oh my God, you're absolutely crazy for recommending plastic or glazed ceramic. That, again, is just my preference. It's how I like to do it. I tend to be an underwaterer. Again, pick the pot that is right for you and everything will be good. Okay guys, well, the sun is going down, my voice is hoarse, I need to cook dinner, so I am going to end this here today. But as always, if you had questions about owning houseplants in the desert, please drop them in the comment section down below. This is something that I live through every day of my life, so I can probably answer your questions. If you learned something new or helpful in this video, then please hit that like button. And if you are new to this channel and enjoyed this video today, then hit that subscribe button because I make ones just like this all the time. Thank you guys so much for sticking around until the end, and I hope to see you in the next video.